for any form of conversation design. And we're here to make it easier than ever for people to be able to democratize conversation design and development for just about everyone. In this series, we cover a bunch from interviewing thought leaders to highlighting creators and their stories, as well as connecting business minds and futurists, ultimately with the goal of being able to grow with our community. So with that, let's get started. My name is Emily. I'll be moderating today. So if you have any questions or if there's anything you would like us to ask Sonia, definitely take advantage of the Q&A section below. We'll be able to get to those later today. And introducing our special guest, Sonia, who will be our senior conversation design expert today, breaking down those differences in between chat and voice design. So with that, Sonia, can you give us a quick little introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. So excited for our talk today. As Emily mentioned in the slide says, I've been a conversation designer. I've been working in this space for about 5 years. I started my journey kind of playing with chatbots when they were still pretty new and not something that companies were planning on adopting. So it's been a really exciting journey to see the transition of how the world is really starting to embrace them. And in 2017, I had co-founded my own company, Hereafter AI, which really focused on using chatbots for the everyday person and designing digital humans. And most recently, I've worked with Anthem and Geico on building out some of their bot platforms, both voice and text. So I'm really excited to sort of share the differences of converting from one to another. I'll try to focus on, I think for the most part, mostly people are changing from using a chatbot to a text bot. So I'll focus on transitioning, making that transition. And yeah, I'm super excited to talk and to hear from all of you.
Awesome, thank you so much. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and it is all you.
All right, so I will present. All right, so let's get started. So this is the presentation I created. It's actually a presentation that I'm working on about 10 different differences. And I've sort of compacted them into 5 so we can go over them pretty quickly. I'm really hoping that it really is a one-stop shop. I know there's so many different resources out there in this space, and I haven't really found one to this day that really boils down all the possible differences between voice and chatbots and is a one-stop shop to look over and sort of navigate those differences. So hopefully this presentation gives you everything you need to know to start working on making those changes. So the first thing that I like to talk about is the most probably obvious, but one that is so important, because if it's not done, it looks really weird. So it's replacing the language, graphics, and links. So what I mean by that is the language, just small words where you might be writing in your chatbot something like, for more information, click here. Alexa can't click, right? You got to say, check this out. You can go here. It's really important to make sure those words from click to see to view are changed to heard and say. It just makes the experience more real. And when those changes aren't done, it sounds really strange. So just that's the first quick thing to keep in mind. The other thing is those graphics. So, you might have, let's say, a image inserted in your chatbot that helps illustrate, let's say, knowledge about a person. If somebody's asking about a person, they can actually see who that person is through that image that you've shared. So you're going to have to find and adapt ways to make sure that those images are removed and there's something else to kind of illustrate your point, or maybe reword what you already had there to make sure that you're, kind of making sense for what the user is asking for. And those links, we often hyperlink different pages to go to for external resources or extra resources. So making sure that we are not doing that anymore for voice. So I'll give you an example of how we did this. I had built out the first HIPAA compliant voice app through Alexa for Anthem, which is a healthcare giant in the US. And in this effort, one of the things that we were going to do is talk about deductibles and let people find out their deductible limits just by asking Alexa. So on a chat experience, this would be something like, at the end of the conversation, we would probably say, go log into your account to be able to see more details about your deductible limits. Now, because it's all voice, we want the experience to be all inclusive. We want to be able to get them from beginning to end through all the information bits without really referring them elsewhere, because that ends up causing frustration. This is a voice experience. They might not be in front of a laptop. They might not be, accessing a device. They might be driving. So we want to be able to provide them as much information and with as much brevity as possible. So let's go through this example. Hey, Alexa, I want to know your deductible. She'll say your in-network deductible limit is $1,000. So far this year, you've accumulated $1,000 towards reaching it. Your remaining deductible balance is $9,000. I just made those numbers up. And she's going to ask if you want more information. Would you like to know about your out-of-network amount? So she's going to try to help you get everything you need to know in this experience. And then she'll say your out-of-network deductible limit is $1,000. A quick tip: using in-network providers can help you save money. And then what else can I help you with today? So that's really pretty much the basis of what people are going to ask for. So that's an example of what we did for Anthem, and we really built it out so that people could get all the information they can without having to log into their accounts. All right, next up in our lightning talk is adding confirmations. This is really, really, really key for voice conversations, because when a person is talking to an Alexa or a Google Assistant or a Bixby or a Cortana, they might not remember exactly those previous conversations, and there's no tracing of it. They can't scroll back up on a chatbot to see what they might have said or what they were exactly talking about. So if you're booking a hotel via a bot, when you're scrolling through that chatbot, you can kind of see, oh yeah, I said I wanted it in this city. These were kind of, I wanted a suite. You can kind of trace your details. You can't do that with voice, and we don't want to force the user to have the user memory, because we don't know where that's not as effective. So here's an example. Anthem, for example, we wanted to be able to send people and email people their ID cards as quickly as possible to the email address on file. So in red is what would have happened if this was just a chatbot experience. Hey, I want my ID card, Alexa, or I guess whoever the person is. We had Sydney, so let's say Sydney. The Sydney would very easily be able to say, you're all set. I sent your ID card to the email address starting with blah and ending with anthem.com. All right, very simple, done, super easy, great user experience. Now, with voice, it gets a little tricky, because what if I didn't say I want my ID card? What if, there's so much more room for misunderstanding and misinterpretation of what a person could say. And the error rate is just higher, because text, when you're typing, it's easy to see what the person said. What they said is what they said, what they typed. What they said might be different. They might have an accent. We don't know. So we want to always confirm to make sure that the task that we're trying to complete is indeed the task they want completed. So before we say, Alexa, hey, I want your ID card. Okay, you want to get your ID card. Is that right? There might be a little lag in time that we want to consider. One moment, please. And then we say we're all set. So adding a confirmation is really key to voice and will help make sure that you are indeed helping to complete the task that the user is wanting. And it is great to add these questions when converting from a chatbot to a voice app. So without further ado, let's move on to number 3, which is ask for more details. So I found this interesting stat, which says that the amount of time it takes for a person to hear things versus read things is quite different. So most podcasters and audiobook performers speak at about 150 to 160 words per minute. Now, that's kind of the optimal amount of words per minute for most users. Now, for reading wise, a skilled reader can read up to 300 to 400 words per minute. So that's almost twice as much. So it's going to start to sound like a run-on and be a little bit too long if you're going to use the exact same language that you use for your chatbot. So consider shortening some of those bits of information and adding the question, like, do you want to learn more about it? So I helped design Hereafter AI's Alexa skill, the conversation that was part of it. And what we were really targeting was, this was a platform where people were able to record their life stories and share it with their family and loved ones. And these stories could be long. Like sometimes people would go on for like 6 minutes, 7 minutes. And that's just, that could end up being a little boring. And the person who's listening might want to get out of that conversation quicker. So to make it the best user experience possible, we sort of broke those personal stories down. We would, do a tidbit of it, like a nice nugget that made sense, had a beginning, middle, and end. But then we would say something like, would you like to hear more about this part of my life? Did you enjoy hearing about that? Just to try to ask and get some more feedback. This is also a good opportunity if you're testing out your new skill to kind of get a little bit of a mini review or a quick bit of feedback on what it is people are thinking of your skill or a piece of your skill. So like this last question, for example, I'd love to know what you thought about that. What's your reaction? Tell me in a nutshell. Did you enjoy hearing about that? That will help you get some of those feedback bits. And that first question is just a way to ask for more details. Another example, sometimes people ask a skill for definitions like, who is Alexander Hamilton? Well, we can get a lot of information about him off of Wikipedia, and that will be a very, very long statement that Alexa will have to make. So we want to break it down. We want to give like a quick definition and then ask, would you like to learn more? And this will make your voice experience excellent. And it's very different than a chatbot experience where you might be sharing links, images, and more written word. So off to the fourth. Communication lapses in time. This is a fun and tricky one. So this is probably relevant if there are any developers on our webinar. You might have noticed that when we're building on a Google Assistant, Alexa skill, etc., that sometimes the processing speed for the API you're recalling might be a bit long. So for Anthem, for example, there were times like when we had to refill a prescription that we were recalling more APIs that were causing an over 10-second delay for Alexa to be able to say anything and know anything to say. So in these cases, it's very normal for a text conversation. We're used to seeing those bubbles pop up when we're texting our friends. When we're talking to chatbots, we see those dots. And it's very like a normal feeling to experience that as a user, a moment of lapse in time. But when you're talking, it's very weird. If you ask a question and somebody in front of you just stood in silence for like 10 seconds, that would be a little bit strange. So we're not used to that in voice. So we need to make up for that lost time while that API is being recalled or while Alexa needs to think if something's going to take a bit longer than expected. So very simple fix to this. Let's say it's going to take 10 seconds to get something recalled and there's no way to shorten it. You can't reduce the number of API calls that need to be made. You can't restructure the conversation in a way that breaks it down so that they all don't have to be recalled at the same time. One moment, please. This is very simple, very easy, but it will tell your users, I heard what you said. I am working on it. I reassure you that I got you. It's a nice little touch, just 3 words that let people know that you're there for them and you are indeed an assistant and you are indeed trying to be helpful. So very small thing, but goes a very long ways when it comes to putting your user at peace of mind that they're being heard. All right. This one. I always say there's 2 parts to designing. There's the part where you're designing the conversation that the user is going to see, but what's the use in that if the user is not understood when they're asking for something, right? So I always like to pay attention to utterances. I like to put as much attention on them 50-50 as I do in creating the conversation, because my conversation, all those beautiful intents that I have created scripts for, are going to be going nowhere if people can't even pull them out. So stock up on utterances, especially for voice. There is just so much variation in accents, in the way people say things. When people are texting, especially with, like, let's say a virtual assistant on a website for like customer support, they can often be very, very brief and short, and it makes it easier to map what intent they're looking for. But with voice, people tend to speak longer. They tend to speak more elaborately. And it's one of those funny things where, even though Alexa, we're trying to make Alexa's statements shorter, the user response in voice is longer than it is in text. So it's reversed. And we need to consider that. So add as many utterances that make sense to go with your intent as possible. So a good place if you're starting out is utterancegenerator.com. I wouldn't recommend this as the only way, because I think it's important to go through and groom out the ones that don't make sense. But you can kind of create a list of utterances based on the different words that you have. So let's say a person wanted to refill their prescription. So here I put up a little example in that box. I think it's a third row from the top. Refill the prescription RX medication. You can put different combinations, and this yielded 9 different results of things people could say. You can copy and paste that over into your platform and remove ones that don't make sense. So this is a very, very great idea to do. It's a great exercise to go through your utterances. Now make sure they don't cross wires, like you don't add so many that it could be confused as some other intent, but do make sure you have all the possibilities that you think a person would say, so that it's accounted for in this voice experience, and your intents will be heard. People will know and be happy with it, because they're getting to where they need to go. So that's our 5th one. I did add an extra one just because I wanted to share this with you guys, and I didn't want you to miss out on it. And that's just adding variety in the error message. And this goes to the point that we just discussed. Because there's so much more room for error in what is heard versus what is typed, the likelihood of an error message being needed is much higher. So we want to be able to be a little diverse in that. We don't want to be saying the same thing every single time. Like, I didn't understand you. I didn't understand you. I don't understand you. That does not sound like a human. That's not how we converse, right? So we want to be diverse with that. So using Alexa as an example, I was just having some conversations with her, and I noticed that when she doesn't understand something, she has these, at least these 3 variations. Sorry, I didn't get that. I didn't hear that. Please try that again. I didn't catch that. Please say that again. Now you can see it doesn't require that much innovation and diversity, but those last 2 are almost the same. The word hear, catch, try, say are different, but it feels different. When I heard that 3rd one after the 2nd one, I didn't feel like she was repeating herself. So you don't have to be crazy innovative, but just have a strong, long list of different error messages for each type that you're hoping to handle. Another example, when she doesn't know the intent, it's just not programmed in her. Let's say somebody's asking for a cheeseburger on a historical Alexa skill that's talking about Renaissance history or something like that. She's not going to know. So, sorry, I don't know that. Sorry, I'm not sure. Sorry, I don't know that one. I don't know that. Those are examples of ways to say, I don't know what you're talking about. So keep it diverse, keep it interesting. That's how we talk and converse as humans. And we want to make sure we don't sound totally robotic when we're coming up with these voice experiences. So that's what I got. I think I tried to keep it as short and quick as possible. I hope those points were good for you. And I think, Emily, I will stop sharing my screen and hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sonia. I'm going to share my screen, and we have some pre-submitted questions from earlier. But for anyone that's already here, feel free to use that Q&A function and answer or ask any questions that you would like us to ask Sonia before the end of this. So with that, I'm just going to share my screen. Perfect. Okay. So one of the things that is really interesting about your background is you've really come at it from this really diverse background in copywriting and content and journalism. And obviously what's so important in conversation design is being able to understand that. So out of curiosity, what kind of inspired that switch from traditional journalism or more content driven with long form into conversation design, both bots and voice?
Thanks for that question, Emily. I have to say it was unpredictable. I wouldn't have known 10 years ago that this is what I would be doing. So my journey was a little bit, I would say, odd and unexpected. I was a journalist in New York writing for the Wall Street Journal, and I had the fortunate ability to be able to interview a lot of, Fortune 500 CEOs, CFOs, and CTOs. And it sort of became obvious to me that there was a sort of rustling desire to become, to transform digitally. And digital transformation was something that I had been working on even within the media organizations that I was a part of. And it just got me a little excited because I noticed that the storytelling skills that I had and those writing and conversing abilities that I had and those script writing abilities that I did on television were all kind of part of the skills that could be needed for these kinds of automations when it came to like chat. And so I started just playing around for fun on some chatbot tools. I'm creating some chatbots for fun, like teaching myself coding. And I wasn't, a person who was trained technically. So I kind of trained myself. And I started loving it because it was so interesting. And my hobby really turned into my profession when I co-founded my own company and worked on building an Alexa skill that ended up being featured all over the world. And, it has just continued since with Anthem and Geico. And I'm just so thankful to have like randomly landed in this space and to be able to kind of see it grow and develop with it. It's such an awesome honor.
It's always so interesting to kind of see all the different backgrounds that kind of end up in this newer space. And I feel like in particular, it's the perspectives that they bring into it. So that's really exciting to kind of hear that going from that side interest into something that's now full-time and really consuming and kind of what you're thinking about day to day. Great. So a topic that comes up, especially now that we're nearing the end of the year, we have seen so much progress in conversation design, in voice platforms, and consumer behavior around voice and around chat systems. Really curious to kind of hear what are some of your bets that you have for conversation design next year or even beyond that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think next year is going to be really exciting. There are a lot of companies out there that are really starting to embrace using virtual assistants, both via voice platforms and also starting and creating or innovating their own chatbots that, were sort of not in the game before. So I think next year is going to be an explosive year for it. And to be honest, I think this pandemic has sort of led to companies really seriously taking digital transformation and virtual experiences and seeing the value in them and also just the necessity at such a weird time in our history. I think that a lot of the development that is happening would have happened a few years from now, but it's taking place much earlier. So I think next year is going to be a representation of that, of things really picking up. This year was sort of starting that. And next year, I think it's going to blow up. And it'll be really interesting to see how the quality and the quantity increase.
Absolutely. I think that reimagining what UX looks like, not only in terms of what consumers are expecting, in terms of channels to communicate with companies, but also just returning to places again in the real life. You think about things like elevators or the touch screens at McDonald's or ordering systems that we're so accustomed to. Are these going to be challenged? Are there going to be new ways that chat or voice or other forms of interaction are going to help? That's really exciting.
Yeah, super true. Yeah.
Next one is, as somebody who made that transition, how would you recommend that someone get started in conversation design?
Start playing. The best way to learn is to, get a login to a company that, works and creates bots, Voiceflow, for example, and just start playing and creating conversations. You will learn so much in just doing that. There's so much value in that. Those small details like slots and intents, and how do I add utterances, and how it all plays together when you're testing out. A prototype is very, very educational, and you'll also learn if you like it. There's so much about conversation design that isn't obvious, and when you start doing it, it becomes pretty clear how it all works together. So I would just say start playing, get an account, and start creating something so that you can see if you like it, and also really that's kind of the best way to learn.
Awesome. What resources do you currently use to level up? Are there any places that you're reading up on, or people that you're following to kind of stay in tune?
Yeah, that's a good question. I still play around with bots, so I take my own advice on that last point and do that, because the one thing to think about is, a lot of companies 5 years ago, every single company that was creating chatbots was a startup. So there's been so much growth and progress, and there's always new tools and different things that are added to the platforms that make them better. So playing around is always a great way to do it. Find something that you like, a platform that you like, and play around on it. Additionally, I read a lot of documentation. So Amazon's a place that I go to a lot to read their Alexa documentation. They have a lot of material that's user friendly and easy to grasp. And I do a lot of, to be honest, Google searching. Just when I'm curious about something, or I have a question, or I want to know if there's a better way to do it, I look it up. And there's a lot of different small resources out there. And I would predict that in, like, let's say 2 years or whatnot, there will be, a newsletter or a source that is very, very prominent and strong, and maybe more journalistic in how it talks about chatbots. So that'll be exciting when that time comes around. But right now, I notice it's mostly embedded within conversations that already exist.
Awesome. What is the biggest misconception about what you do and what you're working to solve?
Yeah, sure. So I can think of two. One is, oh, you work with bots. Like, are they going to take over? No, they're not going to take over. They barely understand us right now. So, and there's so much programming and development that needs to be done to even get a bot to understand, like, take my hamburger order. So that's one thing. The second thing is conversation design is very specific. So sometimes I wonder if people think I'm just kind of like writing the scripts and being like, okay, what would you like to do today? I'm like talking to myself, and that's a part of it. But a huge part of it is very, very logical, is a very logical practice, because with every sentence that is stated, there needs to be a technical side to it, and to make sure that whatever you're saying is able to be pulled out by an API, for example, or the URL exists, or there's just so much that goes into every sentence I write, because there's so many stakeholders involved and like, business goals. So it ends up becoming very complex, and it's not just about writing, but it's really about making sure that it's aligned with all the different teams that are invested in it. So it's much more complex, I would say, than I think people sometimes realize.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that there's so many misconceptions there where it's like, oh, it must be easy. It must be the same as these other things, or it seems so simple. And I think that one of the things that we discuss a lot is that the best bot or voice designs are the ones that have so little friction that you barely notice. And those ones take so much effort. So a lot of that is kudos to the work that people like yourself and people in the space are doing to make that commonplace.
Yeah, yeah.
So one of the things that you kind of brought up a little bit, and I love that you used the rates of understanding here with comparing reading versus hearing. But one of the topics that comes up a lot here is voice first versus voice only, or which channels are best for inputs or outputs. So voice first being voice as the first command, and that linking to different modalities so people can consume that information in screens or perhaps in another modality, and voice only being restricted to only voice. Do you have any opinions about where we're going there, or any thoughts that you, or any perspectives that you have from working on both of these channels?
Yeah, I do have a perspective on this, and my take really is you got to do both, and here's why. So there's a lot of correlation with time here for us, because the world and the people using these are changing over time with us. So 1 year back, the number of Alexa users will be less than 5 years from now. So it's just by numbers, and this was something that we would discuss at Anthem. Just more people are going to be using chatbots because more people are comfortable with, using the internet and browsers, and texting has been around for a while. So time is a big factor in how people adopt. And the whole purpose that we do this is for the users, right? So it's so important to keep that in mind. And as a result of that, I always say you got to do both. If you're just going to do voice, you're missing out on helping a huge majority of people that you can through a chatbot, because they're not going to use voice. Yes, we want to think about voice, but we want to use both. We want to do both, and we want to think about what makes sense for the kind of functionality that we're trying to build out. If let's say it's want to sell something, you want to be able to do that via voice and the bot. You don't want to just do one, because you're losing out on, helping all the users you can, and you want to help them all out in all the possible ways they might want to be there.
Great. The next question over here is, what's something that you wish you learned when you first started out, or something that you had to learn kind of the hard way during your transition?
Yeah, that's a good question. So many things. The one thing that sticks out is I was gonna say, like, starting out, a lot of creating bots felt very technical, and I was coming straight from, a very creative background. So that was a bit of a challenge, but I have to say that's been less of it, because a lot of platforms are user friendly. So people who are not developers can really create create skills and chatbots without too much of a problem. So that's pretty exciting. um but yeah, I guess I just didn't know how, like, the level of technicality it require, and it kind of scared me at first, but I sort of figured that I didn't really have to. And then I decided to build it over time. Like, I started to teach myself coding and all of that so I can keep up. But yeah, I wasn't too sure about how technical it was going to be. So for anybody out there who's like worried about that, I would say don't let that fear stop you.
Great. Yeah, and I mean, I think one of the things that we very much so try to echo here, and myself as well, coming from a non-technical background, coming into this space, is that there's so much perspective that can be shown, as long as you have the tools that are there, that you're getting that experience. It's really empowering to hear that from your perspective, especially seeing kind of all the things you've been able to accomplish thus far. I guess with that, um, since you've been in a bunch of different positions working on what I can only assume is just a myriad of different solutions and different experiences, are there any frameworks that you kind of take along with you that really help to get you in the right mind frame or help you get that job done?
Yeah, I actually have a philosophy on this, and my answer is none. Because initially, when I was working on, like, I worked on two insurance company bots now, and I thought there would be a lot of crossover, and there is. But I like to throw it all away and start from scratch. And inevitably, with the experience, there's things that show up again and again. But the reason I do this is because the persona that I am creating for, Geico's virtual assistant, and the persona that we had for Sydney, who was our chatbot at Anthem, they are different. They might be similar, but they are different human beings. And I like to imagine when I'm writing the scripts of being that person. It's sort of like being a little bit of an actor. So I don't want to be saying things the exact same way I said them when the persona was different. So I like to throw it all away, really put myself from a fresh start in a new mindset of that person and write accordingly. And then notice that there are some overlaps. Like obviously there's going to be a lot of error messages to handle, things like that. But I want to write them in a way that makes the most sense for that person. So I like to throw it all away and just kind of take my experience with me and let it show through a different personality.
Great. I think especially it's incredibly important in this space. I like definitely agree with you that there are great places to kind of begin your thought process, but living by a framework may not be the best space as we're still trying to innovate so much and are still trying to define kind of what that looks like. So I guess
Yeah.
with that, in terms of iterating, in terms of testing your creativity, what does testing look like for you? How are you able to host those tests, or what does that process look like?
Yeah, well, the good news is most of the platforms that I've worked on have the testing capabilities within them. So, I would build out whatever it is, the bot, whatever bot, chat bot, voice bot, etc. And I would test it out within the platform, train it and test it, and sort of look at the records to find out, what are some missed areas, what are missed utterances. The other thing is, I've worked sort of with some of these bigger organizations. We've had big external testing companies that have helped us out. So, they will test on hundreds of people and then provide us feedback of those users in sort of a nice and tidy way. And then we kind of groom through that feedback. So, that's kind of was established within the organization itself. So yeah, there's lots of ways to test. I think it's extremely important to do both small and large studies. Small studies to find out, conduct a moderated test where you're finding out how the person is experiencing your interaction from beginning to end and their thoughts, and just collect those. And then big, just for stats, like how many people are actually completing the tasks that they're set out to do successfully. Do them because the user experience is so important and really a determinant if people are going to come back to use, come back to converse or not.
Awesome. And kind of lastly, in some of the pre-submitted ones, we have some that have been submitted via chat as well, is how does designing for multimodal designs affect your conversation design process? So for those of you who are unfamiliar with multimodal, what that means is designing a conversation that may take place perhaps without someone looking at a screen, or also potentially with that option to have a screen accompanying it.
This question makes me so happy because I love it when we are able to use different forms of media. So like to sort of expand on your definition, like for example, with let's say Google Assistant, you have a Google Home and it has a screen, you can be able to like, the Google Assistant can say things and then also show things. And this is so ideal and so cool. This is a space I'm really looking forward to seeing grow as more people have, assistants at home that have those screens. And I'm really excited about that because with this kind of an experience, you can do a lot more and share a lot more information and make the experience a lot smoother. So let's say, for example, you wanna, somebody's asking about, Alexander Hamilton. Let's go off of that example we talked about earlier. With that multimodal design, a person could hear Google Assistant saying a tidbit about Alexander Hamilton and then show a video of something that he did or war he fought in or whatnot on that screen. And that's just so much cooler than just hearing what it says. Also, like for example, if you want to play a game, you can kind of like make it a touch experience. So be like, hey, let's get started. Click, pick the category that you want instead of her saying all the categories and then having to pick it. So you can really, really make it a very efficient and interactive and fun experience. And I really think the future is here. And I'm just so looking forward to screens being a part of the experience.
I completely agree. And your enthusiasm is so refreshing in that, where it's so exciting to see all these channels kind of come together and really make this really immersive experience. And I think your excitement's a good testament to what's also possible on that design side, which is honestly, I think, to echo kind of your opinion there, is really the future and what we're building towards. So with that, let me get to some of the questions that people asked. So one of them came up, and I love that you used the example of utterancegenerator.com as a quick resource to be able to kind of test and see where you could potentially avoid some repair or some error messages. So do you have any other resources or things that you recommend checking out that are similar to that? So really around things that will better help to kind of frame your mind around how you should be either working with utterances, changing how you use your slots, or potentially just spaces for people to really beef up some of those technical skills.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the best resource, because every platform is slightly different, is really to use to find, if you're starting out and want some hand holding, start out with a platform that has a lot of documentation so that you can refer to it and that really be helped through the process. As I mentioned earlier, if you're building, Amazon has some great resources and it's more specific to building on their platform. So I've looked at so much documentation and I've really found the best way to go about it is start with a platform that really has heavy documentation that, speaks to you, makes sense to you, check that out, then pick them and then run with it. And that will just be like a good sample to then you can apply those concepts and your learnings to other platforms and other areas that you work with and become really, really fluid. And that's one of the beautiful things about this is once you start building up those skills and designing and really getting out there and playing, those skills are very easily transferable to other platforms and you'll feel like, a big fish in the sea because you're going to be able to design a lot.
Brilliant. The next one here is talking about latency. So you talked a little bit about that awkward waiting period that sometimes happens in voice when they have to recall information via API or a database elsewhere. You gave the example of 1 moment, please. Are there any alternatives to that or any examples of other ways that you can handle that latency or that awkward pause that you'd be comfortable sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. One is just, having a variety of messages, kind of similar to the error messages. So like, hold on a second, I'm working on that, or let me think about that for a moment. The second is to develop it differently. And this is something that I did pretty heavily at Anthem, because let's say, for example, the task that needs to be completed is pretty intensive. Like, for example, refilling a prescription. You're gonna have to go into that person's data. You're gonna have to find out all the prescriptions they have, which ones are secure enough to refill over a virtual assistant interaction. You're gonna have to do a ton of, I can't say the number, but we had to do several API calls, and it was just too much for Alexa to handle. So I designed the conversation differently. I broke it up. So we had some stalling questions at the beginning. So while the person says refill a prescription, instead of being like, which prescription, we actually had a fake confirmation message just to stall time so that we can pull up all those APIs that needed to be pulled up with two interactions over one. So we would say, okay, you want to refill a prescription. Is that right? That question was totally unnecessary. We didn't need that. But we added that in to just give us time and stall. So you want to find ways to stall that are elegant. And another way that we could have also done it, and that we did do it, is split up the questions. So we pulled up, let's say, a few of those APIs at the very beginning. Then we asked another question to really pinpoint which additional ones we needed to recall. And that helped too. So the conversation ended up being a little bit longer than desired, but we were able to have the conversation instead of not having it or it being super slow. So those are three different ways to design your conversation and to think about, really matching the technical feasibilities with your design, which is a huge part of the job.
Great. The next question comes up a lot, especially for people who are newer to conversation design or are really interested in kind of taking that step into that role. And I'm sure your day-to-day changes all the time, but what does your kind of standard workflow look like? Is it more independent? Is it with teams? What does that day-to-day process really look like from your end?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to share that. So my day-to-day is something like this. Let's say I walk into a Monday morning and we want to build a new functionality within the chatbot or voice bot. Okay, so I'm going to kind of go over it more week by week just to give a really good idea of what the process looks like. Typically what's going to happen from there is I'm going to start brainstorming. Okay, so we want to have a conversation. I'm just going to make something up. We want to have a conversation about, I keep on talking about hamburgers, so I'm going to stick with it. Ordering a hamburger. And I'm going to start thinking about the different ways that we can talk about that and the different questions that might needed to be asked. Like, what are we going to need to know? Are we going to need to know, what kind of toppings do they want on it? What kind of condiments do they want? What kind of, do they have any substitutions? Like, I'm going to try to think about all the different things that a person could possibly want or ask for when it comes to ordering a hamburger. And, it's going to be interesting because it's not just me writing the conversation, because let's say we want to add a substitution feature. Like, we want to be able to handle if a person wants a veggie patty instead of a meat patty. Our thing's going to have to be able to handle that, but can we? So that brings us to the second point. There is going to be a lot of interaction with the technical side and a lot of technical analysis done to see if, okay, I want to ask people about substitutions. Do we have any data to pull that can help us with that conversation? Like, is there any information? Do we have a list in the back end? Do we have a JSON script of all the different substitutions that are possible? Like, is that even a possibility for me to ask? So I'm going to work really heavily with the technical side to figure out if those things that I think we should be asking are things that we can actually ask and handle and respond to. And there's going to be a lot of conversation simultaneously with whoever had made the request. So let's say there's a business team that has requested this new feature because they noticed a lot of people order hamburgers online and they want to see if a lot of people order hamburgers via chatbot. So there's going to be a lot of conversations about what their business goals are. Like, what's really the priority? What's really the priority here? What are we really trying to do? And does this meet the requirements from an organizational standpoint? All right, so once we have all of that kind of going, and it's really, the details are hashed out, that's when things get really fun, because then I can kind of actually put word to those concepts that I wanted to talk about and start designing them and writing them and thinking about the persona of the chatbot that we have already created. And that's really the fun part that I really, really enjoy. And that's where you can get, I get to use sort of that right side of my brain. And from there, I'm typically the only one who's designing the conversation. And then, so it's a little bit alone, but as you can see, there's a lot of group work and teamwork involved and communication. Yeah, and so from that point, I'll typically try to see if everyone is on board with what I've written. And we'll go ahead and insert that in, train the model, make sure that the chatbot understands how to use it, and test it heavily. Testing is huge, and a lot of script changes come from testing, because we realize, people, like 90% of the people thought this word meant this, or 90% of the people thought this, or people are unsure about something. So then there's those script changes that happen at that point. Then we go into production, and this process repeats. And oftentimes you're working on multiple projects like this at the same time. So that's a little bit of what the week to week might look like, and as a result, the day to day.
Awesome. And just kind of one final note as we're kind of ending off and going into a break, is there any kind of last minute words of wisdom or inspiration that you're able to share with the attendees today?
Yeah, sure. So an interesting fact, and I like to share this, especially for this talk, because we're talking about both chatbots and voice, is that there is no real comprehension difference when people are reading or listening, or reading and listening simultaneously. So both platforms are excellent sources of communication. And this was from an article published in Time magazine. Is just a little glimpse to say, go and have fun in developing these. People are able to really have good experiences with them. And I'm so looking forward to the technology sort of increasing its capabilities, and hence driving the user experience. But I guess my parting words of wisdom is just, the industries are seeking answers for different forms of communication and multimodal designs at the end of the day. So these are great ways of getting started. And I promise, if you join this, this world of designing conversations, there's going to be so much growth and change through your career as it goes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sonia, for joining us today. It's been really, really wonderful to hear your perspective and really all of the immense knowledge that you've been able to gain in the last few years in this industry. And for anyone that is on the call today, we will be sending out a recording of this, as well as a follow-up to any of the resources that Sonia mentioned on the call as well. And if you're curious about how you can get started, perhaps over the break, on ways that you can get started with voice or chat design, definitely check out voiceflow.com/tutorials. Mark, who is also in the audience today, has worked all year on creating a crazy amount of resources to make this easier than ever for people to get started. And if you're curious even more on how to get some hands-on learning, we have 2 more workshops set for this year, both set next week, one on an introduction to voice and voice flow, hosted by our CEO, Braden Ream, followed by an advanced workshop by our in-house engineer, Nico, who will be able to show what's possible with a lot of multimodal experiences as well. So with that, if you enjoyed what you saw today, definitely check out our community. You can see that at bit.ly/VF community, and you can chat with several people that are on this call, as well as a bunch of different leaders in the space. So definitely ask your questions there or get connected. And last but not least, again, huge thank you to Sonia for joining us today. It was really, really amazing to hear all of the things that you've been able to do. Great.
Thank you so much. This was so fun. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thanks so much, everyone. And we'll be sending a recording shortly. Bye.